We're going to be reading Chapter 11 from Heart and Soul. Chapter 11 is titled Jim Crow's a-Dyin'. Jim Crow is a name given to the laws down south that separated blacks and whites and treated them unfairly. The quote for today is from Martin Luther King Jr. It says, "If America is to remain a first-class nation, it can no longer have second-class citizens." So first class, think of like first class on an airplane. You sit in the front, you get the nice seats, you get all the extra bonuses. So first class is like the best. Well, we can't be a first class nation if we have second class citizens, which means citizens who aren't treated as good as everybody else. All right, the picture here, I'm going to show you. It should look a little bit familiar. All right, it's Jackie Robinson. It says, "I heard a story once about a black boy in the South who used to ride the city bus home from school every day. As was the custom, he sat in the back of the bus just behind the sign that split the bus into white and colored sections. One afternoon, a white kid got on the bus and sat right in front of the sign where the black kid was sitting. He stared at the young fellow and then at the sign, back and forth for several stops as if to taunt him. Taunt means to tease. There was a door at the back of the bus, and when the bus pulled up to the next stop, the black boy grabbed the sign, stuck it in his satchel, and took off running down the street." So a satchel's a bag. "The white kid yelled to the driver, 'That boy stole the sign!' The driver jumped off the bus and yelled at him to come back, but the young fellow hightailed it all the way home. He still had that sign too. Now it was not right for him to break the law. But just like many people in the South who were tired of Jim Crow laws, he felt that if the law says that you are less than equal to whites, then it is bad law and it needs to be broken." Okay, take a good look at that one. It's titled Brave Children, Little Rock, Arkansas. After World War II, a young soldier named Jackie Robinson joined the Negro League baseball team in Kansas City. He played well enough to catch the eye of Branch Rickey, a part owner of the Major League Brooklyn Dodgers. Rickey was so impressed with Robinson, he hired him to play for his team despite the ban on black players. Jackie became the first black baseball player to play in the major leagues since the 1880s. White folks in the ballpark harassed the man for 2 years straight. White players pushed and spiked him, while white fans yelled and threatened him. But in spite of it all, Jackie played very well. He went on to be one of the best players in baseball and showed people that black folks were more than equals on and off the field. It was the beginning of a new day for baseball and for the country. Now, I told you that our country grew big and strong from slave labor, but it came of age by the way of the Second World War. America came out of World War II the strongest nation in the world, but in the South, Jim Crow was still the law of the land. Laws were supposed to make black and white folks separate but equal, but black folks were only separate. White folks generally had the better schools and supplies. Black schools were shabby at best. They had very few buses that worked. Black children were crowded into one-room schools. Supplies were always short. Books were outdated leftovers from white schools. And in some places, high school wasn't even offered to black children because the local government felt that they didn't need it. Nothing about the school system was equal. We knew that the key to giving our children a chance in life was a good education, and the only way they would get it is if we fought for it. So began the struggle for truly equal education. Southern black parents began trying to put their children in white public schools and were, of course, turned away. Reverend Brown from Kansas tried to send his little girl to the white school near the house in Topeka and was met with the same result. And so he sued the school board. A lawyer with the NAACP, Thurgood Marshall, took up the case and argued it before the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court is like the highest, most important court in the whole United States. He won, too, and black children gained the right to attend white public schools. It was hard for the children, though. They just wanted to go to schools like everybody else, but the people down there were so mean about the whole thing. Integrating means putting the two groups together. Integrating schools was very dangerous business, but the children were brave. Every morning, all year long, the children had to face angry crowds of shouting and spitting parents and were harassed by their classmates and teachers. In Little Rock, Arkansas, 9 black students were blocked from entering their new high school. So even though the law was passed that said you have to let them go to the same schools, you can't have separate schools, when they tried to get them into the school, the people would protest, they would harass, yell, and scream at the children going in. And they tried it a few different places, 1 or 9 at a time. So a lot of you in elementary school heard the story of Ruby Bridges, I'm sure, by now in 5th grade. And then the Little Rock 9 is another real great story about students who integrated the high school. President Eisenhower had to send armed troops to escort the children into the building. In Birmingham, Alabama, a preacher tried to enroll his children in a white school, and he and his wife were beaten up very badly. A few years later, the governor in Alabama himself stood in front of the door to a university to block black students from entering. What kind of grown man would do such a thing? It took a very long time to get the schools to listen to the court's decision. Having the right to do something and being allowed to do it are two different things. One by one, segregated schools had to be sued to allow black children to enroll. And still, to this day, the schools still aren't all the way integrated because of clever neighborhood zoning or lack of busing. So even though schools are, even though schools are considered open to all people, I mean, even you'll notice where you go to school. In certain places, in certain towns, you have certain types of people. And it's because of the way that neighborhoods are made and where people settled and where the school zone is and stuff like that. So even though they fought to integrate the schools a lot of times still aren't really integrated or equal because of the way people are separated just based on where they live. All right, this picture, she probably looks a little bit familiar. This is Rosa Parks, okay? Busing was a problem in Alabama too. In 1955 in Montgomery, a seamstress left work and headed home on a segregated bus late one afternoon. She took a seat at the front of the colored section of the bus. Now, if you can believe this, when a white fellow got on the bus, the driver told her to get up and give her seat to him. "Excuse me," Mrs. Parks said no. The driver came back, raising a fuss, talking about how she had better get up or he'd call the police to come and arrest her. Like every other black person in America, Mrs. Parks was tired of being treated like a second-class citizen. She was sick and tired of giving up her seat to white folks on buses, sick and tired of being refused service in restaurants, hospitals, department stores, and hotels, and of having to buy second-rate food from the back doors of cafes, and entering movie theaters from the rear to sit in hot balconies to see a show, sick and tired of being forced to drink from separate water fountains when she shouldn't have to. Indeed, Mrs. Parks and millions more of us were sick and tired of being sick and tired. Mrs. Parks did not move for that white man on the bus and was arrested and sent to jail. So I'm going to tell you a story that sometimes you don't hear when you hear about Rosa Parks, that this whole thing of her not getting up from the bus was a protest that had been planned. And they spent time looking for the right person to do it and planning out the right time to happen. And when it did happen, people were working behind the scenes to spread the word, get out flyers, and do all sorts of stuff so that everything was ready for this moment. So it wasn't accidental at all. Now, it could have ended there. When Mrs. Parks got out of jail, she could have just gone back to work. You see, she was not the first person in Montgomery to be arrested for refusing to give up a seat on a bus to a white person, but she was very well known and respected in her community. She was a perfect example of the unfair treatment that black people were made to suffer in Montgomery, and the rest of the South for that matter. The company rallied around Mrs. Parks, and black leaders decided to organize a boycott of the buses in Montgomery. Now, if you've been keeping up with your social studies, you are going to know right now that a boycott is a form of protest And you learned about in social studies during colonial times when the colonists boycotted buying British goods so that they wouldn't have to pay the taxes on those goods. Okay? So, they chose a young preacher from Atlanta named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to lead the boycott. It was agreed that no black person in Montgomery would ride a bus on the following Monday. And come Monday, every bus in Montgomery was just about as empty as a poor man's pockets, honey. Sorry, I was trying to see the picture. Black folks boycotted the buses the next day, the next week, and the next month. Mostly black maids and washerwomen rode the buses in Montgomery, and for months they walked to work or found rides with carpools, rain or shine. Without their business, the bus companies were almost bankrupt. The boycott continued through the winter and on to the next year. Of course, the businesses and government in Montgomery fought the boycott tooth and nail, even bombed Dr. King's house. But in the end, they had to surrender. Dr. King knew that if black folks held to the boycott, it did not fight back with violence, but with a peaceful protest, they would be victorious. And on December 20th, 1956, 381 days after the boycott began, Dr. King called for the end of the boycott after the Supreme Court ruled that black folks all over America had the right to sit anywhere they wanted on the bus, without any shouting, shooting, fighting, or fussing. Black folks won a major battle for equality through nonviolent demonstrations. Glory, hallelujah! Oh, how we celebrated all over the country. It was a sweet and wonderful victory. There would be setbacks and victories to come in the very near future, but we savored this one for quite some time, honey.